Ladies and gentlemen, be like Damien Kurek. For years, we've watched the mainstream media apply one standard to the conservatives and a completely different one to the liberals. Now, former Conservative MP Damien Kurek is calling it out directly, arguing that the media's treatment of Prime Minister Mark Carney proves the double standard is alive and well. Today, we break down his case and why the rules seem to change depending on who's in power. Let's take a look. So this is Damien Kurek. He chose to write an opinion piece and publish it on ctvnews.ca, and I guess credit where credit's due, CTV actually agreed to publish it. The double standard surrounding PM Carney is impossible to ignore. I have a pretty high tolerance for political spin. You kind of have to when you've spent years in the House of Commons and on the ground here in Alberta. But a recent opinion column published right here on this platform claiming, quote, "Moderates are fleeing," end quote, the Conservative Party crossed the line from standard spin straight into fiction. It's a perfect example of a double standard in our national media that's getting harder and harder to ignore. As a Western and rural Conservative, I'd be the first to suggest there's always been a left-leaning bias in parts of the press. But since Mark Carney took over the Prime Minister's office, it's on a whole different level. Every single day, it seems like many in the media are simply a megaphone for liberal insiders to vent their wishful thinking about their opponents. Meanwhile, the Carney government gets a near free pass on policies that are actively crushing a once prosperous middle class. When I'm driving across Battle River Crowfoot, grabbing a coffee at a local diner, or just leaning on a pickup truck on Main Street, the conversations are completely divorced from the drama-obsessed Ottawa bubble. No one out here is losing sleep over what liberals think about conservatives. They're losing sleep because they are a couple $100 away from going broke, and life is not getting better despite being told that it is. People are stressed. We have a country drowning in record debt, and housing and food costs that make basic survival unaffordable for regular families. Streets feel less safe. The immigration system is visibly broken. And when you look at the recent string of floor crossers, Ottawa pundits might pat the Prime Minister on the back for a cunning backroom power play, but regular folks just see it as an insult. The people who actually cast ballots in those ridings, and the over 8 million Canadians who voted Conservative in the last election, are left reeling, totally shut out of the process, and worse, our democracy. Where are the pundits talking about that? Instead of holding a government accountable for a decade of mismanagement, mainstream media would rather dedicate premium column inches to analyzing how our political opponents feel. It's frankly unfathomable how little scrutiny this current government actually faces. Even calling them a quote-unquote new government offends the common sense of anyone who has actually sat in the House of Commons, elected or as a spectator. If reporters want to dig into political machinations, there's plenty to find on the Liberal benches. But I guess the old adage holds true. If it's not a Tory, it's not a story. Let's also put to bed this Ottawa insider fantasy that the Conservative movement is wandering in the wilderness. Just look at the math. The last election was decided on a razor's edge. Less than 40,000 votes placed across the tightest ridings was the only thing standing between the Conservatives and a majority government. I spent months on the campaign trail, including several with Pierre Poilievre in the by-election, and since talking to supporters from coast to coast. They are making it clear they want Pierre and our team fighting for them. Polls go up and down, but when you have a so-called quote-unquote new government keeping virtually none of its signature promises, depending on a divisive U.S. president for its support, fueling divisions in our people, it's no mystery why Canadians are desperate for change. And Liberals and their partisans, whether pundits or in Parliament, should remember that the party that has defined and led the policy discussion on virtually every major issue over the last few years is the Conservative Party, led by Pierre Poilievre. Being a Canadian patriot doesn't mean sitting quietly while the country slides backward. It means demanding better. The opposition wants a Canada that respects hard work, protects their communities, builds prosperity, and actually does what it promises. That is something that should be celebrated. The Liberals and their insiders can keep obsessing over us all they want. Conservatives are going to keep focusing on Canadians and the fight for a hopeful and prosperous Canada that works for everyone. Have to applaud Damien Kurek. I've had the pleasure of interviewing Mr. Kurek in person and meeting him a few times. Tanya was able to actually meet him at convention. And he's just a remarkable man. You know, there's some people that you're around and they have this presence. And between him and his wife, Danielle, I can only describe it as just this aura of authenticity and optimism and Canadian pride. If you want an example of a Canadian patriot that is trying to do everything he can to put this country back on the right track, you only need to look at Damien Kurek. The guy who won his seat, voluntarily gave it up after discussions with his wife and after prayer. And he's just working every day, not only on his farm, but he's trying to think of different ways that he can push the needle and push back against this narrative. Now, everybody watching this channel is not surprised at anything that he has to say. But that's not why he wrote this. Remember, he wrote this for a different audience, not the conservative base. He wrote this for the people that are reading CTV News. Those are the swing voters. And all you need to do, you don't need to convince them of anything. All you need to do is put the seed of doubt that, you know what, maybe the media, maybe they're not doing their job. So, you know, when people ask us, well, aren't you worried about the polls? No, not worried about the polls. Because we're seeing the polls do what they do. And it's not going to change our direction of what we're doing. What we're trying to do is we're trying to continually educate Canadians about what's going on. We're trying to bring stories that nobody's talking about that are important in this country to Canadians. We did a story yesterday on that $750,000 ruling in that Human Rights Tribunal against Barry Neufeld. Just because he had criticism and voiced it about the SOGI 123 program that was being implemented in schools. And he was punished for it because he didn't believe in the ideology. And what happened with that video? Well, let me tell you, YouTube didn't like that video at all because of the subject matter. It got probably about 1/4 of the distribution than the rest of our normal videos. So if you haven't seen that one because it hasn't popped up, that's because YouTube didn't put it in front of you. And we'll link that at the end of this video if you do want to see it, because we actually interview the lawyer of the person that was actually fined that $750,000. So this is the challenge perpetually in Canada. Not only sometimes do you have social media working against you as a conservative, but you also have the legacy media working against you as a conservative. And the Conservative Party has the legacy media working against them. So it's a tough fight, but it doesn't mean you stop fighting. It just means you dig in that much more. And this is why we are going to be even more active and even more involved in trying to push the needle this year. That's why we're going to Ottawa the week of the 9th, and we are going to be at EDA events pretty much the whole week, either in person or remote, because we want to help get more people involved in those ridings. So we're using any influence that we can in order to do that. We don't get paid to go there or anything like that. This is just what needs to happen. And that's what being a patriot is all about. And a lot of you understand that. So for those of you that are getting more involved, that are already on your EDA boards or joined your EDA, or maybe you've gone to work for a politician in their office, hats off to you. Continue that amazing, amazing work. And try to bring 2 other people with you. And encourage those people. Bring 2 more. Bring 2 more. This was always going to be a grassroots fight that leads to a grassroots victory. And that will make it ever the more sweeter when it eventually happens. And it will happen, folks. It's only a matter of time. If history has taught us anything, it's that when the people rally together, we can accomplish absolutely anything. And corrupt people will only be allowed to operate for so long until their day finally comes where they have to face the music, or they are just completely removed. So, ladies and gentlemen, be like Damien Kurek. Continue the optimism. Don't succumb to the despair, because that is what the left is counting on. They want you uninvolved. They want you to give up. They want you to forget about politics. Because as soon as you forget about what's going on, that is when the real corruption begins to happen in Ottawa. So keep your eye on the ball. Keep your eye on Mark Carney. And let's bring this home.